The 1219th day of the war, there have been no reports with such an abundance of good news for a long time. Trump continues to behave relatively adequately. Testosterone approach after the bombing of Iran, quenched with a lot of saliva from the head of the NATO agency Mark Rutte, led to the fact that the American president is now ready to defend the members of the alliance and thinks that Ukraine's weapons are on sale, and that Zelensky had a great conversation with him without scandals and drama. Moreover, sources of Western publications say that the situation with Russia and the United States is very unstable, and they can consider more decisive actions. Although what exactly is not yet reported and not very clear, but it is much more important what is happening on the battlefield. And there, even the Dostniks began to come to the conclusion that the Great Putin's offensive, which was supposed to lead to the capture of 4 Ukrainian areas completely, and also the Sumy, is going, let's say, not according to the plan. Russian pro-war channels began to admit that the Ukrainian military managed to partially stabilize the front in the Sumy direction, and the promotion of Russian armed forces there practically stopped. But this is not the end of surprises for them. Ukraine began to use, you won't believe it, the UMPK, the very weapon that was an incredible advantage of Russia in the last 2 years. Now it has appeared in the Ukrainian armed forces. Screenshots of its use appeared on social networks. Now the important questions are how much Ukraine can produce and how often it can use them. But now the situation for Russian military may deteriorate. Also, the Ukrainian armed forces does not stop the company of drone strikes. Everything that can burn in Russia continues to burn. On the night of June 24-25, an explosion broke out in Taganrog. According to Ukrainian channels, one of the key objects of the Russian VPK, the Atlantero plant, was hit by preliminary data. The plant specializes in the production of components for the control and combat systems of the VPLA. The strikes continue on military logistics, namely on trains transporting cargo and fuel for the Russian army. Well, and the sweet, incredibly funny story. As you probably know, Russian fighters do everything possible and impossible to get themselves behind the Buhurt Starlink. And since Elon Musk does not want to fight this, the leader of the so-called LNR, Leonid Pasechnik, came out on the trail of the war. He banned Starlinks. Zetniks just do not care about such movements and did not buy on the characteristics for the Goliter-occupied parts of the Lugansk region. About this and much more in today's fresh report, which you can support with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions are important for YouTube algorithms. You can support the channel finansivo on Patreon, the link is in the description. I continue a new section for patrons in text, describing the process of working and the perception of some tools. So if you've been thinking about it for a long time, now is the time. Well, you can also buy NVPN, a device for blocking which allows you to bypass blockages, watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, go to blocked media resources. You can decide for yourself what to watch, listen, read. The state should not do this for you, but NVPN will help you bypass all blockages. You can buy it by the link in the description. From ruble cards, from currency, from cryptocurrency. In general, any tool is available to you. By buying NVPN, you support the release of new videos on this channel. This is legal, even in Russia. It is now allowed to buy and use VPNs, at least for now. Well, we are moving on to what happened in the past 24 hours. Trump surprisingly showed himself well at the NATO summit. Apparently, before important meetings, it is necessary to give the American president the opportunity to bomb someone. The content of the Trump press conference completely makes the channel be or. I wanted to give all of Trump's theses right away. Perhaps this is the first time when I have a positive impression from Trump's press conference, writes the author of the channel. Well, some fragments I want to give in a separate video, he says. Trump has an impression of meeting Zelensky. You just had a meeting with Zelensky, did you discuss the ceasefire, asks the journalist. No, I just wanted to know how he is doing. He is very nice, in fact, we had difficulties in relations, but he was nice as never before. I think he wants it to end. What I took from the meeting, he was nice as never before, but what I took from the meeting, he wants it to end. I think now is a good time to finish it. I will talk to Vladimir Putin, let's see if we can finish it. But look, these are brave people, they fight, they have war everywhere. Last week 7,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers died. This is madness, so I will talk to Putin. I had a good meeting with Zelensky, I had a lot of good meetings with different great leaders, but he leads a brave battle. This is a difficult battle. The president of Ukraine himself told about the meeting with Trump. According to Zelensky, he congratulated Trump on a successful operation in the Middle East and emphasized that they weakened not only the nuclear program of Iran, but also the production of drones. With President Donald Trump discussed the protection of our people, first of all, the purchase of American air defense systems to cover our cities, our people, churches, and infrastructures. Ukraine is ready to buy and support American arms manufacturers. Europe can help. We also talked about the possible joint production of drones. We can strengthen each other, wrote Zelensky on the Telegram channel. The president of Ukraine added that he also told Trump the details of how the Russian-Ukrainian negotiations in Istanbul went, as well as the subsequent exchange of prisoners and bodies of the dead. According to Zelensky, they talked to Trump about the situation on the battlefield. Putin definitely does not win. He presented the president with the fact that what is really happening on Earth, said Zelensky. I hope he showed my report. Also told in Ukraine that Zelensky showed Trump with evidence that the Russian Federation is transmitting bodies of the Russian military to the Ukraine and giving them out for the bodies of Ukrainians. The Ukrainian leader also showed the President of the United States a map of the situation on the battlefield, demonstrating that the Russian military successes are greatly increased by their propaganda. It turned out that Zelensky still has a map on his hands. By the way, you will also see them today. Spoiler for Russia, everything is far from as smooth as Putin would like it to be. But let's go back to the quotes from the American president, who is brought by the Telegram channel Beatle. Trump has the fifth article of the NATO bill on collective defense in the event of an attack on one of the members of the bloc, which Trump himself earlier questioned. I came here, it means, because this is my job, but I leave here with a slightly different feeling. I saw how the leaders of these countries rise. The love and passion that they demonstrated for their countries was incredible. I have never seen anything like this. They want to protect their countries, but they need the USA. Without the USA, this will not happen. It touched me, they love their countries. Now NATO will work because they pay much more. Now I do not feel that we are being robbed, and we will help them protect their countries. For the first time, Trump sounds like a leader of the free world. He considers Beatle. And indeed, you can partly agree with him. You can, of course, be a little surprised. Beatle and many other analysts are not fans of Trump, but on the last days you can see a lot of positive reviews from us, regardless of each other. What happened? Did the new American administration buy us, perhaps, or the second option? Trump is beginning to behave like not a normal president of America. No, he's still a moron who has a taboo intellect and behavior of a kindergartner. However, from a deep bottom, he is slowly floating to the point of normality, gradually turning Trump into the first term. There's a story in the low expectation base which I tell you about since November. All that is higher is a pleasant miracle. There are those who continue to criticize every action and word of Trump, but I understand them by inertia, but personally I always keep an eye on them. If someone's inertia beep, even normal actions of a particular subject, then for me it's just an indicator that a person's predisposition is pressed harder on him than a real analysis. In any case, it is important to understand that even though the last week in foreign policy I will emphasize separately, only in it, Trump behaves approvably, this can stop at any moment as it has never happened before. So don't be too happy, but it is important to note the positive moments. And yes, the main issue of this press conference is, or the question about the Patriots from a Ukrainian journalist whose husband is a military man. Then he quotes this dialogue. BBC News, Ukrainian service. Where are you from? Trump asks from Ukraine. Oh, says Trump, my question to you. Are the United States ready to sell missiles for the PVO system to the Patriots of Ukraine? You know that Russia is bombing Ukraine very hard right now. You live in Ukraine now, Trump asks. My husband, the journalist, answers there. I see that you are very, apparently wanted to say, excited. You know, it's amazing. Me and my children in Warsaw continue to be journalists because that's what my husband wanted. Your husband is a military man, Trump asks. Yes, he's there now, Trump asks. Yes, the journalist answers. It's hard, yes, it's hard, and you live here, Trump asks. In Warsaw, the journalist answers. You are a journalist, Trump asks a question that, well, okay, it's Trump. Yes, she answers. Okay, I'll tell you this, Trump answers. They want to have, as they are called, anti-rockets, Patriots. Let's see if we can get something. It's very difficult to get them, we need them too. We delivered them to Israel, they are very effective, their effectiveness is 100%. It's hard to believe how effective they are, and they want more than anything else, as you probably know. This is a very good question, I wish you good luck. I see that it is very tempting for you, so say hello to your husband. Good, Trump says. It is well known that Trump's tendency to make decisions based on emotions. The most characteristic example was in 2017, when he gave an order to strike Syria, when he saw footage of Syrian children suffocated after another chemical attack by the Assad regime on Fox News. So it is here that we can hope that he will influence the fact that there is a place for Ukraine in the orders for the Patriot missile. On TV, the rest of the theses and answers of Trump are brought up. At the beginning of the press conference, he mentioned strikes on Kiev. Expressed the hope that the trillions of dollars, which will be able to be attracted thanks to the increase in the costs of NATO countries to the defense of up to 5% of GDP, will go to the purchase of American weapons. The Ukrainian crisis demonstrated the importance of the restructuring of our military-industrial complex in the United States and its allies, as well as the call. It should be understood that when there is a retelling of Trump's theses, it sounds much more adequate than Trump himself, because, in principle, it is generally difficult for him to give a formulation of proposals that would make sense. We cannot depend on the critical resources of our opponents. You know that we have concluded a deal with Ukraine. They have the minerals we need, said Trump. General Dan Kane said that Putin has territorial ambitions outside of Ukraine. Do you share his vision for the question to Trump? Perhaps it is possible. I know one thing, he would like to regulate, he would like to get out of this thing. This is chaos for him. He asked, "Can I help you with Iran?" I said, "No, you can help me with Russia." No, I consider Putin a person who was led astray. I am very surprised. I thought we would solve this. You said that you will end the war in 24 hours, but 5 months and 5 days have already passed. Why didn't you succeed? Asked the journalist. Because it is more difficult than anyone could imagine, said Trump, although no one but him could imagine that it is more difficult. With Vladimir Putin, said Trump, it seemed more difficult. To be honest, I had problems with Zelensky. Perhaps you have read about it. It seemed more difficult than other wars. Vladimir Putin really must end this war. Here it is important to note that Trump mentions Vladimir Putin as the reason why the war does not end. Yes, maybe this is not such a significant change, at least in the context of everything that is happening, but I think it is important. Because the rhetoric of Trump in the Trump issue is decisive, because everything else he says makes no sense. His promises are not fulfilled, his guarantees are not guaranteed, his understanding changes day by day. Therefore, his rhetoric is the only indicator that shows, at least right now, the attitude towards the problem. And this rhetoric shows that, yes, he sees the problem in Russia now. This is a good sign. In addition, Trump, at a closed meeting with the leaders of NATO countries, stated that something needs to be done with Ukraine since the situation has completely gone out of control. Ukraine means war in Ukraine. The fact that the situation has completely gone out of control is reported by Bloomberg with a reference to the sources. Truth is that it is not clear. According to the spokesman for the agency, this comment of Trump was perceived as a positive sign. In fact, as I expected, Trump's wings of success at the Iranian front in the current testosterone approach is full of determination to solve the next crisis. However, unfortunately, it cannot be disbanded. So let's see how much American president has enough of such determination and what steps he will take. The Nobel Peace Prize is close as never before, and Trump cannot be mistaken in this party so as not to lose it. I don't know what the hell he needs this Nobel Peace Prize. I don't understand it. The Nobel Peace Prize is one of the most controversial prizes that exist in the whole of the Nobel, so to speak, writers. Because it was given to very strange people. Once they gave it to one president who then organized a genocide. Well, in short, the Peace Prize is a strange thing, but Trump really wants it. Okay, Trump will have to work. NATO Rutte, in his turn, continued to smear Trump, and this is still very specific to him. Rutte called Trump a father, commenting on the sharp statement of the President of the United States about the situation in the Middle East. And fathers sometimes have to use strong expressions, said Rutte. Commenting on this, Gensek said that he does not consider it humiliating to use such an address to the American president. Trump is a good friend when he does things that, for example, make us invest more. Does this not deserve praise, said Rutte. On the briefing, Trump was asked, "NATO called you a daddy. Do you consider your allies a fan of children?" Trump answered. He said it very gently, "Daddy, you are my dad," replied the US president. This is, of course, a beep cringe. What kind of circus? The coming of the red clown turned into international politics. You can only be surprised and stunned. But if we are talking about words, then I will separately note that this is just where this daddy came from. I mean, when Trump wriggled after one of the flights. I want to say that I think the claim to the use of the well-known English word "for gods" is idiotic. It is for this that Trump is now sanded, and earlier Zelensky got it when he called Putin a beep terrorist. In the end, even in films with a PG-13 rating, it is allowed to use this word, although not more than once. And the current political situation clearly deserves much more tough ratings, so swearing, in my opinion, is normal. But to call Trump daddy is some kind of fierce cringe. The summit, as such, ended very pleasantly. For Ukraine and NATO as a whole, they celebrate. In spite of the fears that Ukraine will not be documented in the final stone, Ukraine is there, and even more. The Allies confirm their strong sovereign obligations to help Ukraine, whose security contributes to our security. In this regard, direct investments in the defense of Ukraine and its defense industry will be included in the calculation of defense expenses of the Allies. That is, in fact, the help of Ukraine becomes a part of NATO's defense budgets. And no matter how hard it is, it strongly ties Ukraine to collective defense of Europe, no matter how softened the formulation of the stone in relation to Russia is. In the new stone, Russia is not called an aggressor, and the formulation has been removed that Russia bears full responsibility for the start of the war, although Russia is still indicated as the main threat of the Atlantic security. Well, here what is called a sharp 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 or go, yes it. It'd be good for everything to be called by its own names. Putin is a dictator, we are a war criminal, Russia is an aggressor, and so on, but it is much more important that there's actually signed obligation under the fact that the support of Ukraine, including the sponsorship of its defense system, will be counted on the expenses of NATO, that is, it is integrated into the European security system. This is much more important in my opinion, and two more important points of the NATO countries are required to increase costs for defense up to 5% of the GDP by 2035 and the opposing Spain. This also applies to all 32 countries. Confirm the iron commitment of the 5th NATO article on collective defense of the attack on one attack on everyone, which means the USA, including in recent days. Had speculations about the fact that the USA would abandon these obligations. In general, everything is better in the stone than you could expect, or I absolutely agree with him, but while international politics is shaking slightly in the direction of, let's say, further from the turbulence and closer to the real support of Ukraine, it is necessary not to forget that the Ukrainian army continues to hold the front, continues to kill the aggressors, continues to defend the population of its country, and we are in this with you should actively help it, and continue to collect for the brigade on the most acute, the most difficult in the Kravtsov direction. Here is their address. Dear Health, we are the 8th servicemen of the reconnaissance company. We carry out combat missions on the Kravtsov bridge. For a successful operation of the Kravtsov bridge, we need 2 pickup cars, 2 cross-cross motorcycles, as well as our vehicles quickly fall out of the mud. We hope for your support. Glory to Ukraine. Here is the QR code for the monobank in the description of the PayPal monobank and USDT RC20, that is, cryptocurrency. CryptoShakes, welcome. Thank you very much to everyone who helped with this meeting yesterday. It is not closed yet, we are moving well. Let's continue, because this is really what helps Ukrainian defenders right here and now to protect their country, their fellow citizens, and stop the Russian offensive. Well, we continue. Meanwhile, Western partners continue to declare investments in the production of weapons for Ukraine. The Norwegian government will allocate 6.5 billion Norwegian crowns, almost $640 million, for the purchase of UAVs for the defense of Ukraine. These drones will be purchased by Ukrainian and European manufacturers. In addition, Denmark will become the first country with which Ukraine will launch joint defense production. 2025, Denmark will allocate 1.2 billion euros for the Ukrainian production of drone long-range operations. Well, that is, those very striking that fly over the plants. Finally, Great Britain is for the first time buying weapons for Ukraine at the expense of frozen Russian assets. The package includes 350 modernized British anti-aircraft missiles, ASRAM, remade to launch from the ground in just 3 months, and 5 new launch systems of the region. In total are already installed 13. But there are also bad news. At a press conference last Friday, the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky reported that Russia is still receiving machines for the needs of its IPC from abroad, among the exporters including 8 Czech companies. In response to Zelensky, the head of the Czech ministry, Jan Lipashevsky, stated that he did not know about what companies he was talking about. Insider counted about 12 manufacturers of equipment from the Czech Republic, whose equipment arrived in Russia in 2024, the main part of the supply of metal processing. Equipment from the Czech Republic to Russia is bypassed through Estonia, Serbia, Turkey, and Latvia. According to the Russian customs, studied by Insider, in the year 23, Czech machines were brought to Russia for $18 million, and in 2024 for $12 million. Against the background of Trump and Zelensky's participation in the summit, the international isolation of the Russian president looks more acute. Putin will not go to the BRICS summit in Brazil. In the Kremlin, this was directly connected with the membership of this country in the International Criminal Court. Low, so to speak, to those who suddenly forgot that he was announced on the wanted list. The Russian president's assistant Yuri Ushakov directly connected Putin's decision with the membership of Brazil in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is connected, he said, with certain difficulties in the context of the requirements of the International Criminal Court. Namely, in this context, the Brazilian government could not take a clear position that would allow our president to take part in this meeting, quoted by the official of Interfax. BRICS, of course, is the funniest international organization. Moreover, it is not clear what it is actually doing, and the country's participant has practically nothing to do with it, except for close cooperation between Russia and China. Although there, to put it mildly, there are nuances. So now the leader of one of the countries BRICS cannot be sure that he will not be arrested in another country BRICS. Well, cool. On this background, the disagreements in NATO sound, of course, insignificant. Well, Ukraine continues a series of strikes on Russian plants. On the night of June 24-25, explosions broke out in Taganrog. According to Ukrainian channels, according to preliminary data, one of the key objects of the Russian VPK, the Atlantero plant, was hit. The plant specializes in the production of components for the System of Control of War (BPLA). It is involved in the projects for the production of drones, Orion. In fact, the Russian answer to Bayraktar is in the complexes of radio-electronic warfare, as well as in the digital integration of impact FPV drones and other unmanned systems. Russian railway logistics in occupied territories also continues to suffer under Ukrainian drones, says the head of the Center for the Study of Occupation, Pyotr Andriushchenko. Takmak, at 11:15 a.m. on June 25, the defense forces of the joint operation with the first strike stopped the train, cutting it in half, he writes. Bowling begins, who will knock out more wagons? The cargo train, more than 40 wagons, that's all, and cisterns and containers, apparently. Today there will be good photos and video proof, but later. A brilliant operation, I say as it is. The defense forces of the South, according to the liquidation of logistics, are the best. According to the script, there's proof. The place on the map is specified as accurately as possible. For now, the question of security, wait, everything will be, you will definitely like it, believe me, because it's just ecstasy, he writes. Well, we are waiting for the appearance of frames tomorrow. The Ukrainian OSINTRA from the project Cyberbarashno studied the consequences of one of the attacks on the Russian APC by satellite images a month ago. And this is what the analysts told. On May 21-25, the Balkov plant of semiconductor devices was successfully destroyed. 3 hits to the semiconductor production unit and 1 to the mechanical workshop were recorded. This plant is one of the key manufacturers of an elementary base for Russian military equipment. Its products, diodes, transistors, microchips were officially supplied to more than 300 enterprises of the Russian defense industry complex. Among the directions that were supplied by components of the BZPP tank sighting systems, in particular T-72B3 and T-90M, missiles, Iskander, H-101 Kinjal, air-to-air weapons, onboard dry aircraft systems, radar system, radio-electronic warfare, Krasika and Jidal. In addition, the mechanical workshop of the plant produced body parts, mounts, and mounting elements for the assembly of the final products of the VPK, they write. In Russia, again, something is burning and exploding, although Ukraine has long had nothing to do with it. Zabikal, due to natural fires at the former storage base of ammunition, grass was burned, from which the detonation of unmined ammunition began on the field. In the field, more precisely, they write the publication 4 with a reference to the service of the Ministry of Internal Affairs in the Zabikal region. As the publication indicates, it is about the military unit in a large tour of the Kharm region, where in 2014 there was already a large-scale fire with the detonation of ammunition, then 11 people died. The scene and air raid fire brigade is working, engineering equipment is applied to the fire. A total of 25 people were involved, 8 units of equipment, 9 people from the Ministry of Emergency Situations, 3 units of equipment, reported in the press service of the Regional Ministry of Emergency Situations. The fire is still not extinguished. The eyewitnesses publish evening photos of Zervo over the site of the fire in the Big Tour. Russian terror against the prefrontal cities and villages does not stop for a single night. It is mentioned in the police of the Donetsk region. 3 people died, 11 were injured as a result of massive shelling in Donetsk, according to the department. In 24-25 June, the police recorded 3,836 enemy strikes on the front line and the residential area. In particular, Russia sent 13 air bombs and 38 drones against civilians. 19 residential areas were under fire, 75 civilian facilities were damaged, and 51 houses were destroyed. Well, the front line. Today in the report about the situation at the front, there will be an unusual number of Z channels, which dramatically change the tone from victorious to darker, speaking of the most different directions. The most popular ZVN blogger, Yuri Podolyak, admits that Ukrainians are extremely stubbornly resisting, not allowing the Russians to advance, but somewhere counterattacking. Here's what he writes about the situation in the Sumy direction. The enemy continues to try with the forces of the 225th Assault Regiment transferred from the area of Chetkino, where he tried to break through earlier to the territory of Russia and occupy this village, to counterattack us in the northern Arhetim. In the area of Chetkino, by the way, nothing has ended, which is confirmed by the video of the 33rd Separate Assault Regiment of the VSU, which is described by the War Archive as follows. A group of infantry in the VSU under the fire of a gunner in arms and under the gull of enemy drones. Enter positions as reinforcements of the area of the settlement of Tyatkin, Kurskaya Oblast. But let's get back to Sumy. The battles are going on between Andriivka and Alexiivka and continue far away. At the same time, our units, which had already come out to the Sumy-Sudja route in the area of the eastern Pisarivka, had to retreat. In Unikovka, we have not yet been able to press it, and it complains. Thus, it can be stated that the reserves that were transferred here managed to stabilize the situation in the north of Sumy. And without significant reinforcement here, or removing the parts of the enemy to another part of the front, we will not be able to suppress the defense of the Sudja and the features of the city of Sumy. It is stated in detail as usual, calling for hold your fists and pray for the boys. War blogger Anatoly Radov, in turn, publishes a map of the activity of Ukrainian drones in the Sumy and Kerch regions, and separately notes that in Unikovka there is held due to their high concentration. What can I say? As always, as you can see in my reports, in a week they will appear at the Z-Men and in a month in the Western publications. So we are waiting for some New York Times, a week or two after the article that the Russian offensive is not going very well. Sorry for spoilers. On the western flank of the Pokrovske direction, the Russian stormtroopers continue to break through the Ukrainian line of drones. They say in the Z channel, "Don't stop war." That's what they write there. Pokrovskaya direction. In the region of Yuchnoy, we have activated in the eastern and northeastern parts. A hard roll goes through the transit station in the direction of Pokrovske. On this site, the elf firmly sat down and so far does not even allow our stormtroopers to breathe. An unreal number of drones. So far, there is nothing to please you, the Z channels admit. We turn to the Turetsky direction. To the north of Turetsky in the direction of Konstantinovka, according to the data of the same Podolyaki, there are still heavy fighting. The Russians have not yet been able to move forward, despite reports about the opposite. Unfortunately, he writes again, as a few months ago with Novogorivka and a month ago with Torsky, I see messages in our channels about the complete liberation of Alexander Kalinov, which, as well as the above-mentioned messages, do not correspond and still do not correspond to reality, he writes. This leads me to bad thoughts, reports Podolyak. I really hope that I am mistaken. I really hope that in reality we are just trying to enter this village, but we cannot really settle in it. We are constantly being knocked out of there. A heavy fight in Yablanovka in the region of Scherbanovka does not stop. In the north of Turetsky, we are trying to enter the settlement of the White Mountain, adds Podolyaka. In the next direction, the situation for the Ukrainian Defense Force, looks unfortunately worse. According to Deep State, the Russians occupied Andriivka and Constantinople, and also promoted the situation of Alexeyevka, Dnipropetrovsk, and Shevchenko. The project is specifically focused on the events of the last months in two occupied settlements. Here's what the analysts write. The occupation of Andriivka and Constantinople, two not simple settlements, which for some time were under the media lens of the Russians, who repeatedly took control of them, then again and again lost. After that, both villages soon turned out to be in the gray zone, which brought a certain confusion to the situation. And when you work with information details, the brain could literally explode. First glance, it seemed that these villages had long been to go to the red zone and be occupied by the enemy, according to the Russians, but there were certain nuances. If you remember Constantinople, then the WSRF took it at least 3 times, and then again went on a storm or demolished the settlement on the face of the earth. For a long time, the fighters of the Ukrainian Defense Forces tried to hold the western part of the village, but constant pressure and the numerous advantages of the Russian infantry made themselves known. Andriivka in general turned into a separate kind of art, in quotes on the map. At first, everyone could see the enclaves inside the village where the Russians penetrated. And there was pressure from different sides. The Russian forces were looking for a place where they could get into the village and settle in it. The map at some point was very dynamic in the area of Andriivka, and then the most unpleasant moment came. The line of combat collision froze, and a gray zone was formed in the middle of the village. Now we come to the key moment, the long transition to the red zone. If according to Constantinople in the reports, they simply did not want to tell the truth and admit the loss, while in the Russian armed forces in the region of Volchay were moving to Alexeyevka, then in Andriivka it is even more complicated. In recent times, in many areas, especially in the zone of the tactical group Ugladar, it became a habit to hold 1 or 2 positions with people in the settlement and serve it as a retainer, even if these positions are actually in the encirclement. This greatly complicates the work because the information about the real loss and real retention is mixed, and you have to make additional efforts to get to the truth. This is exactly what happened with Andriivka. The gray zone was held for a long time, not just like that, it was tried to hold due to the preservation of a number of positions through which the enemy regularly leaked. Despite this, when retreating, the fighters even managed to capture 1 Russian. Eternal glory to those who failed to leave. Despite all this, the villages were under the occupation of the Russian army. This situation again confirms that it is not enough to watch one video to draw a line of combat interaction. And I want to remind you once again that lies will ruin us all, they conclude in the dipstick. Well, we are moving on to the lemon direction. All the same, Yuri Podolyak tells about a powerful counterattack of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the lemon direction. Here's what he writes. For the past 24 hours, our units of the 20th Army have been fighting between the Lemon and the Borovoy with those who came and went to attack the enemy units. That is, the Ukrainians, he writes. A knucklehead of the strike group in the Soviet Union here is the forbidden Ozovsy in Russia and the meeting of the Storm Brigade. The enemy's idea is very simple, and from a tactical point of view, absolutely correct. With a very strong blow through the Red Kadup, it is necessary to go out and occupy the Novolipovaya district, which is our main logistic hub on the site, and thereby destroy our front and make us move away from the Karpovka and the areas of the Green Valley. In the realization of this idea, the enemy has been trying to enter the Red Kadup for 3 days and knock out our unit from there. While there is information that the VSO has occupied the western part of the village, they were not allowed to go further. At the same time, our units managed to occupy the Grekovka, Petrovskaya, and go to the outskirts of the New World and Glushchenkovo settlements. Thus, we face a counterattacking of 2 groups, he writes, each of which is trying to force the opposing side to follow its will. So far, there is no final answer to the question of who will succeed. The counterattack was confirmed in the 3rd Assault Unit, writing, the 3rd Assault Brigade carried out successful raid strikes in the area of the settlement of Rikkodub on the border of the Kharkov and Donetsk regions. As a result of offensive actions, a platoon of the 283rd Anti-Tank Regiment of the 144th Division of the 20th Army of the Russian Federation was liquidated. The troops of the brigade cleared the enemy positions and fortified. Reinforcements of the 3rd Company of the Kirkuk Colony of the 2nd Mechanized Battalion have managed to improve the tactical position of the Ukrainian forces in this direction. The enemy is strengthening active assault actions along the entire line of combat and contact. Despite this, the 3rd Assault not only resists the onslaught, but also counterattacks the enemy, strengthening neighboring units, reports the press service of the brigade. In the south, where the Russian troops are trying to attack the northern part of Donetsk, the main problem, which is the lie reports the bloggers consider, the main problem of the guys of the 3rd Army, which is advancing to the north to the south, is that in the southern Lemanian direction in the 25th Army there are 2 lines of combat contact, real and by reports he tells in the distance. He drew them on the map, including by open sources, approximately if and where which support not quite correctly indicated, not without the essence. You combine them until no one succeeds, as well as to find them by the appearance of the extreme. I will not be surprised if I am again, as it was in the case of Novogorovka. And as soon as this dilemma is solved, I think that a normal work will begin right here. So far, we have what we have for a month. The Zetnik is crumbling. Ukraine is expected to have a tense and difficult summer. Surely many of you saw this or something like this yesterday. This is a quote from the article Defense One, which apparently retells the same closed briefing for journalists at the NATO summit, from which the BBC took a little earlier the thesis about Russia's ability to wage war of the same intensity until 1927. Retell from Defense One turned out to be a little more detailed, and in it, the assessment of the unnamed representative of NATO looks much more adequate than yesterday, as I expected. The official representatives of NATO predict that Russia will continue to move slowly in Ukraine this summer, despite the high losses. The situation remains gloomy without signs of a breakthrough from any side. Reality is such, I quote the material, that the situation on the battlefield remains difficult. Ukraine continues to demonstrate great inventiveness, but we are waiting for a tense and difficult summer. One of the high-ranking representatives of NATO at the Alliance Summit on the conditions of anonymity said on Tuesday, Russia continues to move gradually in the Sumy region northeast of Ukraine and apparently creates a buffer zone, said the official. However, now his words have become a little outdated. Well, okay, it will be over in a week. Russian troops are also activating actions in the Zaporozhye region in the southeast of Ukraine. Here I would also argue, because there were attacks, but some serious ones are not seen yet. Nevertheless, the representative does not expect serious changes on the front line, despite the pressure on the entire front. Russia does not have enough reserves to take advantage of the possible breakthrough. According to the official, the Russian army this year carries about 1,400 losses per day, and the total number of killed and wounded exceeded 1 million. At the same time, Russia's ability to produce weapons remains high, he said. He said that the country produces about 130 new and restored tanks a month and about 3 million artillery shells a year. For comparison, the U.S. Army plans to achieve a target of 1 million shells a year by 2026. As we know, the tanks will be even smaller in the near future. And a number of repairable reserves are exhausted. I remind you that, according to CIT estimates, Russia is able to produce only a few hundred new tanks a year. But although the Russian military sector is working at full capacity, Russian officials warn that the country's economy may be on the verge of recession. The country functions with a very tense civilian population, the representative of NATO noted. The industrial potential is used to the maximum, but there is a shortage of labor. There are significant budget deficits, which are partially covered by the National Welfare Fund, but it is also close to exhaustion. The sovereign fund has already shrunk from $150 billion to $37 billion. All this, of course, puts pressure on the Russian economy, he said. However, according to his forecast, Russia will be able to finance the war at least until 2027. In fact, the Kremlin sacrifices long-term economic health for the short-term financing of this war, he says. That is, 2027 turned out to be an answer to an even narrower question, when the Kremlin actually runs out of money for the financing of the war. This is without taking into account other failures in the economy, which will also have to be blocked by financial inflow. So in my opinion, it is possible to safely predict that the treasury will empty even earlier. I don't really understand, but like the official himself described all the problems that the Russian economy has. But for some reason he says that, well, he can do it until the 27th. How? Well, that is, if he is so well known, and he is well known judging by the statements, then how will it be? Well, he didn't explain. Well, okay. Let me remind you that the economy and war are, in principle, two complex things that have the influence of many factors and variables. Therefore, it is possible to note only the current trends and not to engage in forecasting. I have repeated many times to you, do not try to find out the future on YouTube. Well, that is, those who deal with the fact that they say that this is exactly when it will be. These are astrologists and fortune tellers, do not trust them. Well, that is, look at the arguments, look at the trends, at the current assessment of the situation, and at the confirmation of the data of objective control. Do not, and this one said that the war would end then, and this one said that then, and this one. Well, this is all bullshit, you know. Even if you built a super quantum incredible computer, it would still not be able to take into account all the parameters that exist in order to give an accurate forecast. It does not work that way, however. You already understood this, I think, in these 3.5 years. Moreover, these statements have nothing to do with the situation at the front, which may change so that the current Russian forces may not be enough even for the turtle of its promotion, which we see now, and Russia cannot fight more intensively. Recognizes the same representative of NATO. In general, all these stories that were yesterday, what does it mean that Russia can be as intensive as it was until 1927, turned out to be, as always, an incorrect interpretation, as I told you, by scientists who raped a journalist. Russians have turned the Shaheds into a large FPV drone, says the Ukrainian specialist in the BPA region, Sergei Busification, and produces the corresponding Russian video. The Russians show the use of the Shaheds with a camera on the radio control in Kramatorsk. Serial release of the Russian product Jaren with a primitive and cheap radio control, as on the video, is quite possible. As far as I know, the Russian flight controller Jaren originally has an BPA online control interface, so they actually need to add BPA to some kind of radio interface. In China, it costs $7,000. Of the advantages for us, everything that is controlled on the radio can be suppressed by RAP, and the flash is reliable. If we talk about the situation with drones on the front line, then the Russians, like the Ukrainians, are actively hunting for BPA operators, according to the author of the Balo Hub channel, the Ukrainian drone operator. Russians no longer spare drones for our operators, not only KABs and a bunch of ammunition, but also ballistics. And then 2 rockets at once, he writes. It is interesting that just recently Alexander Karchenko wrote exactly the opposite, as if the current command does not care about the use of such ammunition against Ukrainian pilots. It can only be assumed that on different sections of the front line things are different. This is what the new commander of the Ukrainian unmanned systems, Robert Maderbrovdy, is trying to avoid, unifying the tactics of the BPA and fighting them across the front. So we wish him success, especially since his first steps on the new post, let's say so, his first steps on the new post have horrified the Z-men. This suits us. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have learned to play together in one more game. Z-Channel Veterans Notes reports about the changes in the tactics of the Ukrainian long-range drones, very similar to what was recently noted, talking about the new tactics of the use of Russian shacks. Ukrainians have begun to apply a new tactic during the long-range attack on the aircraft type, writes this channel. Now on the territory of the Belgrade, Kursk and Bryansk regions of the LPR, and a number of other regions, strike drones fly at high altitude in order to minimize the impact on them by the MOG's mobile fire groups. Next, when entering the target, the drone is lowered directly before the strike. Minuses, drones are practically impossible to hit with the MOGs. Pluses, drones at high altitude are well affected by the PVO systems and helicopters. Minuses, the cost of the PVO rocket is more expensive than to contain the MOGs. We also found out from this post that Russia has a mobile fire group PVO. The only thing I saw was 2 guards, one with a gun, the other with some kind of, I don't know, either pneumatics or something else. Well, maybe there was a real gun, but nevertheless. Which is extremely strange. Well, that is, we are at work, it is not visible practically, these mobile fire groups. Maybe they are directly on the airdromes, unlike Ukraine, where the MOGs knock down 40% of the sheiks. But if the Ukrainian drones really change tactics, then the threat to the earth in one way or another is present, or Ukraine is ahead. Well, and also for me, a very encouraging news, let's see, I don't want to say it, but nevertheless. The Ukrainian design bureau MEDUIT is developing a domestic, that is, a Ukrainian analog of the Russian MPK, so-called corrected air bombs, CAP. This kit, which also allows you to turn an ordinary air bomb into a planned one, is already being tested. The Defense Express newspaper received permission from the developer to publish a video of these tests, the moment of the ejection of the Ukrainian CAP from the Su-24 front bomber in horizontal flight. The developers decided not to invent a bicycle and not to waste time looking for new design solutions, but in fact repeated the appearance of the Russian MPK. However, they have their own filling, the goal is to achieve greater accuracy. At the moment, the Ukrainian CAP is already performing a planned flight at a distance of up to 60 km, which affects the given target. According to the developers, these are exactly the requirements set by the military. Result of a joint decision between the KB and the Ministry of Defense. Currently, the possibility of hitting targets at a distance of 80 km is being worked out. Formally, at a height of 10 km, the range can reach up to 100 km, but it will all depend on the tactics of allocation. We are now at the stage of testing. Test launches were carried out in Su-24, so far only in horizontal flight. The results are positive, especially in terms of the range and functioning of the launch and planning systems. We need to conduct about 10 more tests, which will then be examined in the Ministry of Defense. The main problem that prevents us from moving faster is money, said the representative of the KB MEDAID Oleg Vostrak. We are looking for any opportunities because the cost of such a product is about $1,200,000 or about $25,000. This is already cheaper than Western samples, the Defense Express notes. In fact, now it is the financing that is the main holding factor on the way to the completion of the project and the beginning of the serial production of the Ukrainian cab, added to the KB MEDAID. By the way, the answer to the question of why in Ukraine for so long they could not simply copy from MPK. The Ministry of Defense put high requirements for accuracy because Ukraine does not have so many resources, first of all from the airport, to shoot hundreds of cabs a day with deviations of a couple of tens of meters from the target. Ukrainian aviation needs high-precision means of destruction, in fact, similar to JDAM or ASM Hummer, let alone the technology of MPK, to accurately strike Russian positions as it is already done with the help of Western air bombs. Let's hope that the product will go into series in the near future, and then life for Russian military will be much more sad for tens of kilometers from the front line, the main reason for the Z initiation. Yesterday, the ban on the Starlink was imposed by the decree of the goal leader of the Lugansk region, Leonid Pasechnik. Wall does not have the authors, so Ivan Filipov, the author of the channel on the Western Front, collected the reason for this. The head of the so-called LNR, Leonid Pasechnik, banned the enemy Starlink and LNR under his orders. The point is that it is on the Starlink that the entire military connection is maintained, says Filipov. Well, they all hunt a significant part of it, these other methods such as Wi-Fi bridges, but today we are not about them. So let's get back to Filipov's assembly. The initiative of Pasechnik at Z channels was found by a live response, he says. Another joke from the Internet Officials section writes in the channel turned on the war, a ban that will help in almost no way. Apparently, Pasechnik will knock down the satellite group Maska right from Lugansk so that they do not fly over it. Everyone be ready. But there's a nuance, writes the Russian Ministry of Defense RF Telegram channel Rybari. On the purchased and private order Starlink since last year, Russian servicemen are sitting tight in the SVO zone, because this is a great means of combat management, which does not yet have analogs. Whatever prohibitions were introduced by the local authorities, the army will not cease to use Starlink, but this will greatly complicate the lives of volunteers, through which most often the terminals are supplied to the troops. How will this affect the combat capabilities, says the superfluous. It would seem that it was a hindrance to separate the fly from the cullet, and indicate that the restrictions are not spread to specific individuals who need Starlink to serve or supply for a long time, avoiding a double interpretation of the order. But in the end, the chopper approach, which is more harmful than the benefit, is also another argument in favor of the need for the appearance of a fatherland on the Starlink analog. Fortunately, it has a positive dynamics that reassures the fisherman. What he really means is not clear. Alex Rodriguez did not pass the topic. Here's what he wrote. What do you think, Elon Musk? When I read it, I thought it was a fake channel like some F***CK. I went in, checked, there is no RBC. This is the news for you, comrades military, to laugh, and what can I say about this? Many people know my attitude to the use of Starlink, and I formulated it only at the beginning of its application to our country. This attitude is formulated with one phrase: either you control your resources or someone else's resource will try to control you. For all this time, we have transferred more than 200 different versions of Starlink into the OSR unit, because we are not talking about fantasy, but about reality. The whole front is covered with Starlinks, despite the periodic blockages. Starlink is the basis of the data transfer system of the lower and middle ranks in the army. You don't like it, you want to argue, well, argue with reality. Only reality, in your opinion, doesn't matter. Is it good that we have it this way? No, it's bad. But it's not about whether it's good or bad, it's about reality. Because there are no working, budgetary, reliable alternatives. Is it funny to someone? Not even once. Find out what is worse than rejecting problems. Stubborn rejection of problems with the prohibition of solutions already found without creating a working alternative. People, return to the objective reality of the country of pink ponies. They are waiting for you here. The war has never been won yet. However, if you want to be an info reason for active military, for an irritated, sarcastic smile through the facepalm, well, okay, it's your business, says Rodriguez. From my side, I can't help but support the initiative of the wise leader of the LPR. You need more of this struggle with the scientific influence of the West. We recently found out from an interview with Kemezov that the bourgeois BMP Bradley, or at least their analogs of the Russian army, are not needed. And now it turned out that the old link was not needed, and soon these new-fashioned drones may not even appear. Moreover, the word is not Russian, and powder, in principle, the Chinese have also invented a non-Russian invention. So I absolutely support them with all my hands. A new wave of Busification in Russia. Leader of the LPR of the School of Callers, Alexei Tablev, said that an increase is recorded in the case of an obligatory call in Moscow. If in May the calls were pointed, then in June the situation changed dramatically. People are caught on the streets, near the entrances, in the subway. According to their data, military personnel together with the police carry out raids on addresses. The goal is to carry out a plan on the call with which the military personnel of Moscow do not cope. In Moscow, the raids began again. People are caught in the subway, on the streets, near the entrances. Police officers and police officers take the callers without explaining the reasons, sometimes with the use of force. According to the bodyguard, even the presence of medical contraindications from the deadline for the study or the presence of any other documents in Poland does not save. They do not listen to any arguments, and within a day they are literally brought to a mistake and sent to military service in the voivodeship. Rubric: The Motherland Will Not Forget You. In Moscow, detained a member of the SVO from Uzbekistan. On June 24, the police detained a 36-year-old military man, Abjuzet Zahid Tuirov, who arrived at the Kuntsevskoye station on June 24. He was found under the identification system of persons. According to the master, he was in an interstate search as a fugitive for a heavily arrested and accused of bribery in Uzbekistan. At the same time, Tuirov has citizenship in Russia. He received it even before the war with Ukraine. In 2021, the man lived in the Ryazan region. He signed a contract in October 2022 and apparently did not have a problem with the law until he moved to Moscow. The arrest of Tuirov was already notified by the Altsanievs of Kirov in Uzbekistan. The future fate of his participant is unknown. Well, just think about it. Well, that is, he went to war with Russia. His people announced a search for this, and Russia is like, oh yes, we will give it to you, so that's it. Great advertising. I usually refer to Russians and tell them that they should not go to the Russian army, but dear foreigners, pay attention to this case. Also a good indicator of what can happen to you if you are not destroyed by a drone, a bomb, or artillery ammunition. Well, Michael Nacke was with you. Be sure to help the Ukrainian defenders. I will remind you of all the links in the description. And see you soon. All the best. Bye.